make this dog look three-dimensional and feel like he's got, you know, a snout coming toward us, that his face has shape, we have to look at the light and dark patterns. We have to see that it's a little darker on this plane of his face, which is facing toward us, that it's very light on the top of his nose and the top of his head, which are facing upward, and then it's a little darker on his nose, which is also facing toward us. And so as I build that, then I need to be thinking about those light and dark patterns. Now the other thing is that he has this lightness around his eyes, but it's not actually white, and right now I have it white. So I'm going to need to get some paint on that before I start doing the eyes. The eyes themselves, I think I'm going to leave until the very end. It's always one of these questions, do I do the eyes now, get them over with, get them where I like them, and then paint the rest of it? Or do I take that chance of getting the eyes put in at the end? Now I do like the feeling of building up around the eyes and making sure that I've got all that built up good before I do the eye itself. So in that respect, we're going to wait and do the eyes at the end. Let's see, where do we need to worry? First of all, I have a little bit of paint right here, which I don't want. This shape of these eyes are going to be very important, and so I need to be sure that I have that shape working. So let's start with removing this little bit of paint and really getting that up into a little bit of a round up there. That's feeling better already. And this eye, actually, well, it's going to go dark up there, but the light needs to go a little higher so that the dark can go higher. So let's just bring that up a little bit. This is that thing of, you know, sort of looking and saying, how does this compare to that? What have I done that maybe isn't quite right? And doing these little corrections now while I am still building things is so much easier than trying to come back in later. So even though it feels like maybe it's an awful lot to be coming in and dealing with this at this point, I think I do need to do so. Now the other place that it's a little bit light and I sort of lost it was right under his nostrils here. So just coming in now and just getting some of this light stuff picked up and working. And I started to get that one lifted out when it was wet. Let's just do it the rest of the way now. Okay, and I didn't like how harsh this was, so let's just sort of soften that a little bit, and we can come in and play with that some more once we build that up. Oh, and I see one other place that needs to be sure and be light. It's relatively light and was probably going to be light enough, but he has a little lightness at the top of his lower lip area here. And I say his little jowl needed to turn and go around the corner here just a tiny bit. Alright, anything else? Other stuff is dark things. Let's just sort of soften this little edge right there. Soften that little edge just a wee touch. Okay. And his ears, they're so light right now that all the light that's going to be in them will be just fine. All right, let that dry just a wee touch. We can start working maybe up in the ears. It's like this halfway between warm and hot and cool. And it's our fall weather. So I had some gray-brown mixed up here for another dog project I'm doing. Actually the same dog, but a different view. And I need to add a little bit more burnt sienna to this mixture. So we're using burnt sienna and phthalo blue to make his color. And I need to stick with that since I've gotten started with it. And maybe this needs a little yellow added into it. It just feels like maybe it's a little too red. So let's get some yellow added into it. This is New Gamboge. It's a nice orangey yellow. Yeah, I think that helps a little bit. Okay, our usual game, coming in with one of the lightest colors that we're going to have, and just painting it in. You know, I still haven't decided for sure what I'm going to do in that background, whether it's going to be gray or if it's going to be a color or if it's going to be left white. Just coming in with a little bit of water to thin this just a little bit. It's going to be lighter right on those edges. Come down a nice little shape here, and hey, you know, I think he comes out a little rounder right in there. And that's lighter there. This is lighter right on that edge. Let's lift a little of that off. That's going to come right up and into his forehead. So let's just move it on in through here. I'm feeling like right now I need a slightly bigger brush. To sort of decide how much of this I'm working at a time, and think about where I've got some stop points. So this, I want to bring it right in into that area next to his eyes at this point, because I want to get some of that. Maybe I should have stayed with that smaller brush. I was going to work around those eyes. To come down wet all the way into there. That's the one fun thing about wet and wet, is that you can get these beautiful velvety looks when you go to put a little bit darker color in on a medium wet area. Not a soggy wet, but a medium wet area. So now we're going to build across his face a little bit. So working from this, because I'm right-handed, I want to start on the left side and work my way over toward the right so that I'm not putting my hand right down into what I'm doing. And now I need to soften this side here right now, absolutely without any slow down. Let's soften this edge right there, and then that's going to be going darker and underneath of there. Now I need a little bit darker paint, so let's bring a little of this over. I've got some phthalo blue sitting in my pan here where I can mix up a little bit darker brown, and now this is darker, thicker paint. And it's going to just bleed a little bit, which is what hopefully it's going to bleed the right amount. And if it's not bleeding quite the right amount, I'm going to come in with an almost dry brush and just pick a little bit off of there. So I'm getting that shadow down the side of his face there. And now let's go, we need to go a little bit darker right in here. And down along the side of his nose here. So all my brush marks are sort of following the contours of his face. Get a little bit more of this slightly yellowier color. Put Put it in right next to there, and then soften this out again until we get to that ridge line. And what's happening up here, does that need to go even a little higher? I think it does. It needs to come almost over to the top of his eyes. So that needs to go a little higher there. And then there's one dark line that runs not right next to his eye, but close to his eye and up into this area. Dry my brush 3/4 of the way so that I can take a little moisture out of here. It's close to the eye, and maybe too close to the eye right there, and too close to the eye right here. Let's just pick a little of that out, and hopefully it doesn't bleed back into there. Let's pick a little of this off right there. Okay. I'm dampening that just a little bit so that it's going to be a little smoother in there. And then I'm going to come back in with my brush and pick just a little of that off again. Right next to his eye. Okay, there's a point when I have to just say, okay, Margaret, don't fuss with that, because when you're working wet and wet, there'll be a point when you're going to be picking up more paint than you want to, and you maybe can't come back in and do the dark that you need to, but I do need to come a little darker right underneath of his eye here. So this is a little darker, thicker paint. It has to be a little bit thicker, or else it's going to move around too much and move the other paint the way I don't want it to. And that's his nose. Now let's get in here on his nose. I'm going to do a little dry brush sort of in here, because you can sort of see his whiskers. It's a little darker, but not a huge amount darker. And that comes a little darker right down into the bottom of that. Right in the bottom of here is a bit darker. And then when it gets around in the front of his nose, right in underneath, there's a little light space that stays there. And this comes up a little light space. Don't let it be too big. Hopefully my face isn't getting too much into this. Now I need to integrate this darker into the little bit lighter side, but I want to do it sort of dry brushy so that it's, make sure that that's not too wet. He's got little white fur there, but he's not dead white. This is still a little darker right in that area right there, and then let's work it right across. Where's this other nostril? Right there. Right across and to this other side where it's going to be dry brushing. A little more paint in on top of that. It comes down almost a little triangle of dark there, down to that mouth line, and then we'll dry brush out into the rest of that muzzle. A little darker right underneath of the muzzle right there. And then I'll come back and deal with that chin later, because it's got to stay dry. Okay. And then it's going to go darker next to that. So let's go back up onto his forehead. See if we can pick up where we left off there without causing problems. He has, you know, there's some little, you'd call them worry lines if it was a human, but he's got some little fur lines there that actually add a nice little touch to the shape of his head. So maybe a little too yellow. And then that's going to go dark in underneath of his ear there. And it's going to go even darker. I'll come back at some point and do an even darker little layer there. It's getting very uneven looking. I need to get working on this to pull this down in here. And I'll make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush. So again, it's going to come in and paint right next to his eye. And we're going to have a dark line around on the inside of the eye where I'll define the final shape of the eye. But I want to have it close. And this comes out a little bit wider right here. Let that be a little light space that's a little bit wider. And I don't like this dark space right here. This dark space is doing nothing for me. There we go. And then we need to come in here with a little bit slightly darker, and then I'll put even more dark on top of there. I'm going to stop it where it's going to be close to his nose. Come in. It's going to wrap down through there. Okay. And then remember, this all goes up, maybe all of that goes up a little higher up in there. And then I have to soften, just really dampen my brush, come in and grab the edge of that, soften that edge. He's starting to come together, but he needs a little more dark in there to really pull his shape in. So it's this balance between having enough water in your mixture so that the paint will move around, but not having so much water in your mixture that it spreads everywhere. So now we're going back into a little darker, thicker paint here. So mixing up my phthalo blue with the burnt sienna to get a little bit darker, thicker paint. So this is going to go a little thicker, darker here. Today is not a super hot day. It's sort of a medium day, so things are not drying overly fast. I can come in and work on this a little more than I might have been able to otherwise. So it's going to come close to his eye, but not right at it, and then work its way down. And so that's a little thicker, darker paint right underneath of his eye, and on a little line right around his eye there. Okay, and then down. This is like a little triangle underneath of here, coming in, finding its way down in there. Okay, I think this, I'm still okay on painting in there. It's always this little shaky thing of should I stay away from there? It's real dark, and then it comes around the eye, so maybe this comes out here a little bit further. Okay, I need to sort of halfway step back and make sure that I have that about the right distance from his eye. If I make it too big, it's going to look weird. If I make it too small, it's not going to do what it needs to do. So, you know, getting that Goldilocks perfect is always hard. Dry my brush, maybe come in with just a little bit of paint on it so that I can get a mid-tone above this darker. Yeah, that looks better with a mid-tone above there. Okay. And then put mid-tone again on my brush underneath of this. So rather than the really dark, but still pretty thick paint, mid-tone, so that I can bring that color down without having to introduce water. Dry that brush out really good, and then pick up the bottom of this, dry it even a little more, pick up the bottom of this and drag that down into his nose. Add just a wee touch of mid-tone into there until I get to that line. It's starting to come together. Now it needs to go darker underneath of his eye. Close up into there, almost a triangle underneath of here. Come down, find the edge of that nose, and then work this triangle down and into the side of his face. His face, I think it's a she. So this friend Mel, who owned this dog, had a whole series of chocolate labs. None of us are sure what the name of this particular young lady was, but we do know that Mel loved her a lot. Pretty much indispensable. Everywhere Mel went, one of his dogs was with him. He'd only have one at a time, but they would come and be with him and do stuff with him and travel for the day, hang out. He'd train them to do smell tests and find animals on his property. He was not, he was a hunter in a way, but he didn't like to kill animals, so he really liked going out and finding them and seeing what they were doing. And so of course his dog was very helpful with doing that. Let's see here. This ear, we needed to go a little bit darker and just a hair of yellow in it. One time when we went to visit, he had put out a number of camera traps and had gotten some really cool photographs of, you know, deer feeding, and even one trap had food for bears, and so at night he'd gotten some pictures of bears on his property, things that he had never seen during the day, but you see at night. And the deer, you know, they knew not to get too close, and so unlike California, this is in Wisconsin, the deer would not come close to his house, and if they knew the dog was there, they weren't going to stick around. But he got some good pictures on the camera trap of the deer feeding in a meadow with snow. One of these days I'll paint that particular photograph that he had given me. All right, and let's see. Now, something that I think we probably are going to want to wait until this is totally dry. Yeah, if I try and do it now, I'll have to come back in with thicker paint on what I just did there because I don't want white lines in there. Texture for the fur. This is something that once this dries, I can come back in and just do little tiny lines on here to create that feeling of fur. It's just, you know, what does that texture do? Oh God. What does that texture do when you go and put your hand right in the middle of a wet spot? That's why we're supposed to work from one side to the other and then don't go back in there. Now this looks like we should have a light line back in here. And maybe this will lighten up just across that area there. Oops. That paint is still pretty damp, so it's picking up an awful lot. I'm gonna have to just pretend like I didn't do that and put some paint back into that area, because now I've got it too light. Sometimes you just can't help yourself. And now the next important thing here is going to be to get that dark of his nostrils put in, because it looks funny without it, doesn't it? It's one of these things that we're afraid to put them in, and we're afraid to leave them out. I'll probably have to do this in 2 stages, because in reality there is a darkness on that side of the nose, which is important, and we'll need to get into there. And it's this brown gray, just like his body. It's all similar colors, isn't it? It comes out to there. Yeah, that light part of that is only on that other side, and I'm going to have to soften the edges of that light part, because otherwise it's going to look wrong. Let's soften the top of this. Dry my brush 3/4 of the way, pick up the edge of this, and just let it soften out. And then same with this. I could come back in after this is totally dry and do these softens too, which would be the safer way to do it. Now I'm coming back in with that thicker, darker color. At this point, it's going to bleed just a tiny bit. I need to darken the chin. Remember that chin needed, oh, but you know, and this is where a little red-brown, there's some light shining on this. The rest of that is trying to do a little dry brush downward, because he's got little white fur on the chin there. This needs to be a little darker. And then after this is totally dry, I'm going to go in a little darker for that edge of the mouth. I can overlap it up into there some. I'll probably have to step away from that and say, now what did I really need to do here? There's a darker right in here. Okay. I might be getting to about the point where I need to stop and assess this from a distance to see what I've done and what I need to do next, because it's still not quite right. I think this still needs to be darker on this part of his nose. And then the nostrils will need to go absolutely black. And then let's soften the top of that just a touch. Okay. And then, oh, it goes a little bit darker right behind where the skin of the nose is. Yeah, that'll make that stand out a little better. And that comes down into there. And then his whisker lines. You know, he's got whiskers, just not like a cat does. So there is the little whisker lines that come in through there. Okay. Now he's going to have to go quite a bit darker underneath of his chin and neck. And then we'll have to make this decision. Am I really going to go in and do more work on his body down in there? Or are we just going to leave the work up in the... So this is going quite a bit darker here. There's some fur. Oh, I like being able to show some fur. He had pretty short hair, but that was just one little place where, yeah, it comes down a little more. A little thinner there. And then it's going to go pretty dark off on this whole other side. So I need to add more blue into that mixture. We need to get thicker paint, thicker with both the brown and the blue, so I can drop thicker paint into here. One of the things that happens, you know, when you have, you think you've put down thick enough paint, but then when it dries, everything from underneath starts showing through. And that's lovely. And thicker dark paint goes up into here too. And shadow underneath in there. And then this just goes up into that. And the same dark underneath of here. And then soften the edge of that just a touch. Dried my brush halfway. And then the same dark paint can become the nostrils. Dark enough. We're going to do a little more dark across that nose to get that as dark as it needs to be. This is all going to be a little darker. Darker down in here. That's what that means, is just to let that be soft. Edge. This is going to come down and sort of dry brush right into that lip area. And then this comes out a little bit. Grab that and dry brush it down into there just a little bit. Balance is so important at this point, to make sure that we have it balanced where it needs to be balanced. I'm continuing to work on this because it's relatively damp, and as long as I come in with drier paint, it's not going to bleed back into here. And but I still have to have enough paint on my brush that it doesn't lift up what was already there. Got a lot of bright light right in front of me, and I'm having a hard time really seeing him. I'm going to have to stop and step back from this, put it on my easel, and see it from a distance. Let's see, that has to wrap around through there, and we have to come right into that. Oh, maybe from over on this side, okay. This afternoon light is lovely, but it's also right in my eyes. Let's see, that goes a little bit darker right up in here. Oh yeah, that takes that up into that area nicely. But now I have to soften the edge of that. Margaret, you really must stop, because I'm at the point where it's going to start lifting up things that I don't want it to lift up. And this is a little darker right here. Once again, Margaret, Do you dare? You're daring even though you shouldn't. Show everybody what happens when you do things you shouldn't. That's what we're doing here, isn't it? A little paler color on my brush, but still pretty thick. The thing is that this is going to start picking up. Okay, Margaret, you absolutely must stop. Although I hate this. I have to soften that. It was just too rough looking. Now I will stop. Okay, I'm going to stop, get this from in a distance, and figure out what I'm going to do next here. How much of the body, because now that I've got that darker on the head, the body's going to have to go darker, so we're not going to be able to just stop and say the body's fine. Okay. At this point, I'm ready to do the eyes. I think the eyes need to be my next thing, just because those ghost white eyes are now bugging me. And as scary as it is, it's at least now I've got the paint that I needed in here and it's dry. So I'll be able to come in and work those eyes. But because the eyes scare me a little bit, and I also wanted to sort of talk to you guys about, you know, how to approach these eyes, I'm going to do a preliminary. So this is on another piece of paper, still good watercolor paper, but I'm just going to sort of work through on these eyes. You know, so we're making a round, shiny object, and there's big highlights. There's big highlights on the top of the eye, and there's the iris, and it's going to be very important where those irises are because they tell us how that eye is looking toward us. And so those are extremely important to get in the right place. The highlight on this eye here drops down in across that pupil a little bit. And he doesn't have any whites of his eyes showing, and so she, I'm pretty sure it's a she. She doesn't have any whites showing, so we don't have to worry about trying to work the whites into there. Her irises really are going all the way out as far as you see in the eye there. Now we've painted, this dog is getting painted with 3 colors only: burnt sienna, phthalo blue, and new gamboge. Now the brown in the eyes are a little bit more yellow than the brown up on the fur, but it's close to the same thing. So I'm going to just use that same brown that I had, add a little more yellow to it, and no, that's too yellow. Get a little more brown in there. Now, to get that very liquid look in the eye, I have to paint this relatively wet, but I do want to pay attention to where those highlights are. So I'm not going to worry about that dark pupil yet. We're going to paint that in on top of there later. And there's a little bit of a blue, in the reflection on there. I'm going to leave that white for now. So I'm going to come in, all the dark area is going to get dark later. So we can just come up and paint right into those dark areas. Now remember, when you're making a round object, you have to have a grade between, you have to follow the shape of the object, and you have to have a grade in between the, oh, I'm sorry, it's hard to talk and paint at the same time here. Let's get that paint right up into there. Okay, so now I've got some paint down. Now I need to grade this to make it look round. And it's got to grade just into the edge of where those highlights are without really getting into them. So I'm just coming in with a damp brush, and I can come right into where the darker the pupil is. Okay, now that I've got that paint down, and the top there is a fairly hard line because there's actually a shadow from the eyelid coming down into that eye, and it comes just maybe a touch more than what we've got there. It's going to go up into that pupil. I'm just going to take a little bit of paint out of there. Now I'm going to come in with pretty thick, darker paint and drop a little bit into this lower area while this is still wet to get a grade. And then once this dries, then I can come back in and do those shadows on it. It goes darker all the way to there. Okay, so let's try that on the other eye while that dries. And I've got a spot here that I don't like. Let's get this. So I'm drying my brush 3/4 of the way, coming in and lifting this just a little bit here. Okay, now I'm going to try that again on the other eye. So that little bit more of a yellow brown. So leaving the highlights out, not painting them. Trying to remember to leave the highlights out and not painting them. This one has a little highlight that actually comes into the middle of the eye. And then it's dark across the top. It's nice actually to do this little bit of a practice because I haven't done the eyes for a little while, and they are a little trickier to do. When you get them right, they are so nice. When you get them wrong, they look icky. So just dropping a little bit of darker color around this edge. And then it can go a little darker right up here in this top area. It's going to go even darker in that top area later. That's out to the edge of that eye. Okay. Now our other one, yeah, it's dry enough. There's a very light blue, and I've got to be careful not to get that too dark of a blue. Just a hint of blue in this light area. Okay. Let that dry a little bit more. Now we're going to be going darker, so let me mix this into the dark that I had from before. And this part of the eye has shadow in it, and it goes up a little higher up into this. Comes out into that corner and shadows underneath there. And finds the edge of that eyeball and just a teeny bit there. Okay. And I hope the cat doesn't decide she wants to come and help, because that will not be helpful. And now I need to go a little bit darker with this part of the eye down here. Miss Raven, you really don't want to get into my water. It's not good, clean water. Cats, they never know what's good for them. And I'm also feeling like we really need to see the skin around this eye, because otherwise it feels so lonely out into nowhere land. Now that's still going to go darker in the iris. And is that dry enough for me to do that? I need this relatively sharp here, not entirely, but relatively. I need to go a little higher. It's to go up in here a little higher. Okay. And it needs to be darker underneath here. This is still too light. working. Once that totally dries, then we can come in and do the darkest part of the line around the edge of the eye. And, you know, painting an eyeball sort of out in nowhere land like this, I find difficult because you need this dark around his eye so that one reason to paint that eye socket first is it helps you identify all the rest of this that has to happen. There, that's looking pretty good. That's looking pretty good. And that white, it still seems too bright for most of it. So just get a little bit more blue into there. Oh, that looks better. Just a touch of blue. Does that look better or look worse? Pick that off just a wee touch. And then really go dark. The center of this is going to go darker. And this up here is going darker, if I can get it darker. That's starting to look like an eyeball. Oh, good, 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 good. So eyeball partially done with the first layer, sort of establishing the colors and where the light and dark pattern are. The eyeball with all of the darks put in. And this glow underneath here is important. That I had to lift that back out to make that work. But the dark range from the really dark iris there, and where that light is, and that there's actually light on the eye. I know my husband is a photographer, and getting highlights in eyes is like one of the most crucial things when you're doing a portrait. And I'm going to just lift a little bit of this right here because it feels like it needs it to get that eye, the light coming down onto the eye just a little bit further. Okay, so now that I've got that scary trial done, I think maybe I can attack the real thing. Let me see if I can do this. This is scary, but I think hopefully I have the shape of that. I can do a little adjustment on that eye up in there. It looks like I'm going to need to. What's one little thing that I think I need to do to get that to happen is this has to go a little lighter up in here. I can always go darker later, but that light area, I need to move it up because there's going to be a little bit of dark shadow coming up a little higher there. And there's a little spot right here. Something got spilled, and I don't necessarily want a hard spot there, so let's get that lifted out. Okay, so let's see if I can do this. Medium, small brush, not too big, not too small. We're starting with a little bit more of a yellowy brown, and we're leaving the highlights behind. So this comes, there's sort of a horseshoe of highlight there, and we're not worrying about the, you know, I'm going to get a different brush. Get one size smaller brush here. I think this is going to be a little bit easier. Okay, so now this is going to go up. You know, I'm always saying use the biggest brush that you can possibly work with. Well, this is a case where the brush just felt like it was a little bit bulky for this small area here. And let's see, this can maybe work up just a little bit. It's going to be dark across there, and there's a beautiful dark space up into here. All the way out into there. Now, while that's still damp, I want to put a darker brown into there. And it needs to be relatively thick paint or else it's going to move around too much. So we're just going to be dropping a little bit of this in here. And this gives us that sort of varied color so that you get a variation between the yellow, more yellow brown. And let's just, I still feel like it needs a little more yellow in here. So I'm just going to put some yellow straight into here. Yeah, there, that feels good. So we're working wet and wet. And as you perhaps remember with wet and wet, the more you work into it, the thicker and drier the paint needs to be for each additional piece that you add so that it doesn't move around too much. So this comes up and really, I need to go even a little higher there. Maybe it also then, maybe that needs to be a little narrower. Hopefully my head is not getting into this. Such a hard time with something like this that's so detailed that I want to get right in on top of it. Okay, I think that's going to have to dry. Be sure this is soft on this side of it. And then remember when I did the trial, I was able to come in with even darker after it dried a little bit. When it's still pretty wet like this. Oh, and let's go ahead and throw just a hint of blue. Just a hint of blue into this white area. And I can come in on that too. We're going to go darker on that eye. Come on, Margaret, I have to sort of pay attention to where my camera actually is. I like to think that it's on the other side, but it's not. It's on this side, and so I've got to be careful to lean in too far. All right. And that shape is so important there. Okay, it's going to come in. Okay, that's good. Can I actually do anything darker yet, or is it going to bleed too much? It's going to be a little darker right in there. Get brown in on that. Those brown of those eyes need to be a little darker right in here, and definitely back into that corner. So doing this while it's still wet allows me to get a gradation in the color. And I'm going to say this is still a little bit too yellow. Step away from it, Margaret, work on the other eye, come back and let that dry, and then you can get the real dark places in. Like this is too light up there, but I can't really do a lot about it right now. There we go, that's better. Okay. The other eye. And once again, those eyes tend to go upward here at the top with a shadow that's happening in there. That is a little less on that side. Ooh, but I've already done something I don't like. on this eye, the shape of the light space has a hole in it up into the center. Oh, I've gone backwards on that. Trying to do negative painting, and instead I am doing positive painting. Okay. These guys come down, and it comes up. There's a light hole that comes up, that comes down. Okay. Right into that corner. And the eye drops down just a wee bit there. Follows the shape up here. Let's drop a little yellow, a little more yellow into here. Just dropping a little more yellow into there. Okay, good. Doing eyes takes practice, and that's one reason why I want to do those preliminary ones. Now I'm getting a little bit darker brown here. And we're going to have a little darker brown. Make sure I've got enough paint on my brush that it's going to drop in here, not pick off the paint that's there. Okay, we'll let that dry. Now let's get this a little bit darker in here for the pupil. Get the pupils in and suddenly things look different. And then this shadow that's happening up here, it's a shadow, so we need to see how it comes right next to that highlight and into that corner and is underneath of his eyelid. He doesn't have really big eyelids. You know, it's not like human eyelids where we've got this very thick eyelid. I want this to come across that yellow just a wee bit. It goes into that corner just a touch. Oh, yeah, that's starting to look good. A little darker right down in here. Almost black. Almost black underneath of there. Bottom of that, almost black. And I'm feeling like when I did the preliminary, I'm almost, this is too much here. Let's just take a little of this off. And then take some of this down into his eye just a tiny bit more. That shape feels a little better. You know, it's all these small things that if you really want an animal to look like the personality that was there, these little details become very important. And he needs to be a little darker right up in here. And then up into that part of the face is a little darker. his highlight here. There we go. Just do that a little darker right there. And now has that dried enough? I think it's dried enough. Okay, so now this other eye, it needs a little more work. It's going to go a little darker on this side. And then we need to get the dark shadows that happen inside of the eyelids. And when I bring this dark shadow down a little further, that helps to say that's shadow from the eyelid. And see how it turns and rounds into the eye. Now it's a little bit darker. Since the light's coming from this way, it's a little bit darker on this side of the eye, so I need to make that a little bit darker. And then that blue that we were doing, it's going to come in and across here, down into that a little bit, a little more across that. Still keeping that pretty light, but a feeling of the blue reflected in his eye there, I think adds a nice little touch to that. Here's something else that was bothering me when I was looking at this earlier. We needed to lighten that just a wee touch, but not too much. Get that brown. We touch. Okay. Do those need more, or are those eyes just lovely the way they are? One little tiny bit. That area where I lifted, it's still feeling like I didn't get it quite as dark there as I got elsewhere, which is making that lift really show, and I don't want that to be the case. So now that it's dried a little more, come in with a little darker right through there. That's better. That's better. Okay, my dear. Mel's Chocolate Lab. So the next thing that'll have to be done on this will be the body down in here. I am going to let that wait, but maybe I'll get that red of the collar put in right now. Cad red, that's what we had decided, or I had decided. Up to that buckle. And then a little right there. Yeah, there is a little red brown underneath there. We'll start with red, and it will turn, I'll darken these a little bit afterwards, but at least we get the establishment of this red color in here.